one of the things that private equity investors do to help both add value, because your typical private equity investor will describe himself or herself as a value-adding investor, and to protect their interests, is to serve as directors. And I know that both of you do that. Talk a little bit about the role you play in the boardroom when you take those director spots. And I expect it'll be a little different.
Well, Tim and I share a board together.
Share a board together, right, which is fun.
Yeah.
Well, I view, we have a lot of businesses. You get to know the businesses well. You get to know the high spots. Sometimes management is not aware of what's possible. If you're looking at a future larger transaction, they'll say something like, well, we don't have enough money. Well, there's equity and money everywhere. That's not a constraint. But you hear my style is to hear the dialogue, hear what their objectives are for the year, ask a lot of people, try to get a diverse representation on the board.
Do you bring non-management, non-investors onto your board?
We have.
Yeah, we always do. No.
So comment on how your view might change.
Well, I mean, we try to bring a lot of content. We try to, typically in a deal of ours, we'll either have 1 or 2 board seats, and we try to put people in those seats who have specific content-related expertise. We have a water company we're just funded recently that we put a guy on the board, one of our members, who sold a water company a year ago. So we have a deep industry expert. Then we will typically structure the board so that all the directors elect an independent director who is a recognized expert. And it's amazing how often you can get those guys on boards if you ask.
How do you compensate those people?
Options, typically. And at Christmas I send them autographed pictures of me. And if they're really good, we send them 2. But the other thing that's different perhaps with us is because in John's case, that board represents pretty much all the stockholders because you're all in it together. In our case, there are often groups of stockholders. And what we always tell our investors in my own practice is you're there to represent the common interests of all the stockholders. You cannot show up and say the preferred wants this, even though it's adverse to the majority common. I don't think you can do that, and we wouldn't want to get into that position.
John, talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is, again, where the lawyer can help clarify things. When you think about directors and responsibilities that are owed, it doesn't matter whether you're a director representing the private equity investor or an independent director or one of the old founders. All the directors owe 2 primary duties, a duty of care and a duty of loyalty. Now, when you look at the duty of care, how do you satisfy that? Well, at a minimum, attend meetings, read all the material provided to you, actively participate, and make sure there's records, recording all that. The duty of loyalty is where there's sometimes, conflicts, because you have an obligation, as Tim said, to represent the interest of the corporation as a whole, and there may be situations where if you're, again, out of the private equity fund, your interest may conflict with that of the interest of the corporation. Let's say you're in a private equity fund with several portfolio companies and this opportunity to acquire another business comes along. And you think, well, that's an opportunity for this company where I'm a director, but maybe that's an opportunity for some of my other portfolio companies too. Well, you have a conflict at that point. And you need to step out and not participate in that because, you just can't otherwise resolve it. And there's other examples. The private equity people who have this 5-year plan and exit may not want to make the same decision as people who have a long-term objective because they may be thinking, in the short term, this investment opportunity isn't good if we're planning on selling the business in a year or 2, even though if we were hanging on for another 4 or 5 years, it might be a great investment. That's another example of a conflict. So you need to make clear when you're on a board and you have this potential for a conflict, make sure at all times it's very clear which hat you are wearing. I am now representing the corporation. I can't look at what's going on in the private equity fund. If you step out of that role and now I'm representing the private equity fund, just make it very, very clear what role you're playing in each conversation.